It is 6:30, and I'd like to call this District 204 Committee of the Whole meeting with action to order. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Marilyn, can you please call the roll?
Member Alvarez?
Present.
Member Vita Daniels?
Present.
Member Dillon?
Here.
Member Giannotti Fry?
Here.
Member Gretsch?
Here.
Member Struing?
Here.
Member Thomas?
Here.
Great. All right, let's please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Out of the gate is public participation. Do we have anybody? All right, great. Skip a lot of words. Then we are going to jump right in and begin this evening with our action items related to the consideration and approval of bids for the summer 2025 facilities project. So Brian Stacek, sorry, Brian.
I do that all the time.
Tongue-tied tonight.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, President Gretsch. So let's go back and just briefly revisit our conversation from our last meeting. Essentially what you have in front of you, nothing has changed with the exception of one additional contract. And that additional contract, as we mentioned at the last meeting, was the contract for the asbestos removal that would be required with these projects. And so, again, the change to that was the fact that we did open bids for the asbestos abatement project, and the lowest bidder was DEM Services out of Alsip, Illinois, with a base bid of $193,000. And so just for clarification on that, as you may recall, we had about a $260,000 estimate in on, for that number with the original numbers that we had provided for the budget. And I think we're going to be $193,000 plus the fees for the services from our consultant, our asbestos consultant, we're going to be right around that $260,000 mark. So I think that's a very accurate number in terms of where we are. And so I really, as far as the total numbers go, nothing has really changed in terms of what we talked about from the last meeting. The fund balance has not grown, nor has it shrunk since then, of course. Those numbers have stayed the same as well. And so really tonight's discussion is really about how we want to proceed, and if we want to, if the board wants to approve these, essentially 3 projects, and the 4th is just that asbestos removal piece that is required. Again, I'll be happy to answer any questions for anybody on any of the information that we have here, and that, of course, including the asbestos removal contract. Again, at the last meeting, we talked about what all of the 3 projects are, what they entail, and I think I would turn it over to the board at that point.
And, I think really at the crux of the conversation is the comfort level of the board dipping into the reserves. The total amount here, Brian would put the reserves at 48.6%.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that is where we need to kind of start the conversation, so.
And let me just clarify
Yeah,
on that.
please.
That 48.6% is based on our 2024 numbers.
Okay,
So that's no guarantee for anything going forward. It's not as though, well, that number's going to stay the same in future years. It could grow. I mean, there's a lot of different factors and things that can happen when
Sure.
we look at the finances of the district as we go forward. So it's just a static number based on the 2024 audited financial numbers, if that makes sense.
yep, thank you.
Sure.
I can start. Okay, so I really appreciate you putting this all together. I'm going to reiterate what last meeting that we had the discussion, that I do not have a comfort level of dipping down to 48.6%. And, when you look at it, it's really pretty clear which one needs to come off to not go down below the 48.6, and that would be the toilet room remodeling, which to me I was very excited about, thought that was a great thing to do, but as a board member with fiduciary duty, I feel that very strongly that going below that we would be, you know, putting the district in, you know, going below the fund balance of 50%. You know, we are lowering that fund balance, and to me, that's an important thing that we need to preserve that. So I am not inclined to vote for all the projects. The one that I would vote for all, or I reframe it, I would vote for all of them except for the toilet rooms at the 1.5. And I think then if we did that, my understanding was we'd be right around the 50%.
You'd be right in that ballpark, that's correct.
Okay, so that's where I'm at. Not to say, because I think when we go through that list, there's so much that we do need, so much, I mean, and this was really a list, I mean, I do understand and appreciate this was a list that was already pruned down. But when we're looking at necessities, I mean, obviously, the elevator, to me, is the biggest. We need the, you know, we need the abatement to be able to do some of these projects. And I think it makes sense not to break up the AC. That is one big project to do. And, you know, I wouldn't, and I know you were really good in, you know, understanding, for us to understand that it would have been, we can't do like 5 million there or 7 million. It's really an all or nothing for there. So maybe the numbers fall out. I would not be in support of voting for the toilet room rehab.
I disagree, and I feel like for a number of reasons, but I also have some more questions, I guess. The reason I am for it is I think the work has been done to draw it up. Obviously, we can hold on to those. Costs are what they are today with me, and costs that we've already seen go up since the last time we went out to bid. My fear is that project is going to get much more expensive down the road. My concern with our existing functioning bathrooms, they are functioning, but they are not ADA compliant. I have concerns about that. I think that has always been, at least in my mind and several others, I think, on the board, a concern for accessibility for our students. That to me is also very important. But I guess after I'm babbling on here for a little bit, I guess one of the questions I have for you is, and I know you can't forecast this, but you do have a AAA rating, an excellent rating, and so you are very good at your job. We all, I believe that. So can you give me your thoughts in terms as to why you think going to 48.6 is safe and sound? I've always heard 45 to 50, but can you tell me a little bit more why you think this is a good idea for us to do this?
Yeah, I think that when you look at that number, well, first of all, let's in board policy essentially says that the board would like to maintain, I believe, 33% is what board policy says. Not that has to be our standard by any stretch of the imagination, but that's a minimum, right? That's a minimum right there. And what I think is that as I kind of mentioned during the last meeting, I think we're talking about a difference of about $1.4 million in terms of this total dollar amount. And so, look, our budget, our operating budget is between the $95 and $100 million area right now. And I think that in my history here in the district, now this is my history, and I think it goes back long before where I was here. If you look at the fact that we would have $48.5 million versus $50 million. I think that ultimately we have, there are sufficient funds there that if we had some issue, we had to immediately go out and replace a roof, right? And that's $1 million, or whatever it might be. And really that's what those funds essentially are for. And our operating expenses and our budget are tying out and they're matching. And we've seen some nice surpluses, granted, albeit some of it because some of the revenue, the CPPRT, as we've talked about, has been much higher than than anticipated. But I think those factors are really important. That at $48.5 million, the district is still really on solid financial ground. We have plenty of money in the bank if there was an emergency of some sort that we had to replace something major. We have that money there. Of course, that potentially could draw your fund balances down a little bit further. But, really that 50% number it's not arbitrary, not by any stretch of the imagination. It's a number that says, look, this is where, the AAA rated districts usually sit about, that 50%. This is where the auditors have said that's a good number to have, right around 50%. And so we're kind of using that information. And at the end of the day, still having $48.5 million in the bank, still being at, let's call it 48.5%. I really think we're in a good position to utilize this money. And quite honestly, this is what a lot of districts, and I say most districts, most districts would use this type of, the fund balance for. With our fund balance being up around, we'll see it in a little while, I think it's around 67%. That's a fine number too. We are in no way, shape, or form anywhere near a challenge that we're holding on to too much money, those types of things. But, this is really a good use of these funds. It's also, it's a challenge too in these buildings, as everybody knows. And so really, when we have this money available to us, I think it makes sense. I don't think that we're putting the district in any financial harm in terms of moving forward and being financially stable. And so, I I don't see a major issue in terms of utilizing these dollars for that. And again, look, we could make up that $1.5 million in the next year in the budget. All of that can happen. It can also go the other way too. Let's, look, there's also things that can happen. The state comes along and says, well, we're gonna change. We've heard about this for years, right? And the talk is back on the table about funding pensions and all that sort of thing. So does more come to the district? Yeah, I suppose that's possible. But I'm comfortable being right in that, right in that range of the $50 million. I don't.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, doesn't Vision 2030 also talk about allocating more funds for teacher development, for funding school, like in general? Granted, it's a Vision 2030, but we are hearing some things from the state that they're wanting to guarantee more funds for the districts.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if those will matter at the end of the day in terms of what our total fund balance is, that sort of thing, because I would suspect that those will have ties to sort of like a grant, right? You're going to be reimbursed for those, for your expenses, which is fine. That's great. But again, I don't know. I don't know how much of an impact those would have, but I'm not concerned about being $1.5 million less than the 50%, because still sitting on $48.5 million, I think that's a good number. Good number.
Thank you.
I'm going to just follow up to that. Historically, how low has the fund balance gone at LT?
That's a great question. We had a history, and let me see if I can pull that up real quick. Let me see. I'm going to have to get back to you on that one,
Okay.
but I want to say that we have typically been around, we've been between, I want to say 40 and 50% historically. But I need to get back to you on that, because I actually have a spreadsheet here. I'm not sure what I titled it, and I need to search for that.
Sorry to be.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I just, because I guess, Ian, I think it's clear, just, for what you had said last time, that there's also a risk that, as we've seen in the past, that there could be surprises with this also. And I think, that's probably not fully accounted for in here, because you can't account for all unforeseens.
Well, so in these projects, there are allowances that are built into these
Right.
projects. There are certainly also the potential for, change orders up and above and beyond what the cost of the project is. However, we have really, and this is kind of a tribute to DLA, to Ed Wright and his team, we've really generally been right in the ballpark of where we need to be in terms of these projects. I wouldn't anticipate that we would somehow see a $500,000 change order come into this project somehow. Right, Ed, Yeah, I mean,
We need wood
yeah,
next time, yeah.
yeah, I mean, that, you know,
Right, right.
historically, we've not seen things like that, and I don't anticipate that we would see that here either.
But there have been change orders.
There are.
Right, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's important to,
Yeah.
And to make that kind of significant
ways, too.
percentage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes
We've
they've-
seen reductions too,
Right.
so we've seen
Yeah.
in other
We have.
ways.
And again, to be clear, those allowances are what we use first, and those are already included in on the project amount. So to that point, if they're not used, the district actually, I've brought deductive change orders back to the board. I can't say that's gonna happen here, but we have had that situation as well, where we've also had to, essentially deduct the total cost of the contract because we didn't use allowances. So that happens too. But you're right, there could be something that comes in that could change it, but is it going to significantly change what we would see in terms of that fund balance? I would doubt it.
And I know you're not an economist, but we have tariffs that are being thrown around between
Yeah.
multiple countries, right? And
Yeah.
there's talk that that could increase costs for consumers. I imagine that if we continue to delay longer, that could cost us money on the front end.
I think it's very possible that could be the case.
How many
Do
bathrooms again
others-
were we talking about? Was it 9 bathrooms? with
Nine
that?
washrooms
Okay.
here at North Campus, yes.
And I'm inclined to agree with Tim in favor of moving it forward for a few reasons, and some of it is because that 1.5 million. I mean, when was the last time we actually did those bathrooms? They're,
I think that those facilities are original, the facilities are original to the building.
and so I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm just throwing it out there,
Yeah.
but 1.5 million amortized over, probably this discussion would never come back up again for another 60 to 80 years, maybe more. You know,
Do you know when those bathrooms were?
The one stack is original, the stack here, all the infrastructure is original. There was some coats of paint and some partitions done.
Maybe some
about
tiling?
10 or 12 years ago, but all the piping in there is original.
Yeah. And if you go to the washroom here on the lower level, we have been having trouble with the plumbing. It's been actually leaking from one of the washrooms up here down, and we've actually had to, we've had the plaster ceiling, has actually, it's not plaster, it's a concrete ceiling essentially. But we've had water leaks, we've had damage in that lower facility. And so we, obviously, to Ed's point, we've not done the plumbing in those. And so that's one of the again, we're on those and repairing them as we go, but we're seeing more and more of those types of things occurring as we go through time.
I'll pipe in. I tend to lean more towards getting this done than not. I think that that little bit of overflow of 1.4 million, I think it's minor. If that operating budget is in the, in the basic range that you stated, I think it would be a very small dip for a pretty big outcome. We host a lot of communities in this building for a number of different reasons, and I think that if we're in a position right now to be able to get our facilities up to a point where they can reflect the LT community in a positive way, I think that's a win. So that's kind of where I stand.
So I would be inclined to only move forward with the elevator replacement. Phase 1, Part 2 has strayed very far away from what the original phase was supposed to be. And so the other area that I have concern with is taking over 12 million out of the fund balance. No board has ever done that here. And for us to just take 12 million plus we already took 5 million or so out last year, I think that's too much. So the only area that I would be inclined to move forward with is the elevator.
Brian, do you have
Does
those
anybody
numbers?
else-
I'm sorry. Do you have those numbers of when, for the board, I mean, when has, that large amount come out of the fund balance?
Not since I've been here, and I have no point of reference prior to that. we have, well, first of all, in the last couple of years, we've used some fund balance. I'd have to go back and actually look at that. And we know that we're out there for 5 million on the existing projects, because we've talked about that. There was, I have to go back and look, but the year before that, we used some fund balance as well. And then I'd have to go back to I think it was 16,
Air
17.
conditioning project.
Yeah, I think it was the
Six, I
16,
think.
17 year.
6 or 7, that was the highest that I can remember.
Yeah,
At
and-
least in our time here.
Yeah, and I think that was probably also about 5 million, I think, somewhere in that area, I think.
So if I, from the 4 years sitting around this table, like, we've talked about the fund balance for a while, and there were a couple of years where we just couldn't do anything. And then those discussions were led, we're gonna have the bond sale plus the fund balance. Like, I know 67% is what you're saying where we are now, and you're fine with that. I think that's too high.
Yep.
I think that money is supposed to be reinvested into our school and into our students. So I think the conversation since I've been at the board have always been to chip away at it. This is a big one all at once, for sure. But to me, I'm aligned with moving forward at the 48.6% of the fund balance, because to me, the guidelines are around 50%. That's less than 2%. That's like a margin of error that you would get in most any statistics. So I'm very comfortable with that.
I think the other option, too, that we have is that as I start to look at the operating budget for the coming year, we also will typically have, let's call it somewhere between $1 and $2 million annually out of the operating budget that we utilize for any other projects and things that we have that, would come up as we go. We can probably utilize some of those dollars as well out of the operating budget to potentially sort of fill that $1.5 million gap. And, it's sort of a matter of moving the money from this here to here, but nonetheless, we could back that number down on the fund balance. When we take a look at what our budget would be for this coming year, although I don't have a projection on that yet, we'll be working on that here coming up. We could, use some of that money. We talked about the fact that we didn't have to use any of the operating fund money now. We could just use the fund balance and then, use the operating fund money if necessary, or we can put that operating fund money into this project and then save it in the fund balance. Either way, you're kind of accomplishing the same thing. Because if you don't use let's call it $1.5 million or $2 million for next year, well, that just stays in the fund balance and it doesn't go anywhere else.
Yeah.
So it's just another way to look at it, but at the end of the day, it's still the same sort of pot of money, right? It's the O&M fund, capital projects fund, and the fund balance, and that's really what it is.
Sorry, one more thing, I promise I'll stop talking. The only thing I would say to that point, though, is I also don't feel great about going below 50, and I would like us in our future budgeting to get us back to at least that 50%. I know it's easier said than done, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but
Yeah.
I'm not thrilled about going to 48.6, but I see it being a necessary evil for the time being until we can get that back up.
Yeah.
Especially based on the scenario that you just shared with us, which is fantastic. I'm also inclined to move forward because of the recommendation, the fund balance, the 48.6 fund balance. Construction costs are going to continue to increase. They never go down. So this might be a really good deal for the bathrooms being at 1.6. So that is where I stand.
Does anybody have any other questions or things you want to ask for consideration or have brought to the table for consideration? I know Brian's going to come back and answer some of the historical questions that you shared.
Right.
Jill.
The only thing I would add is I think everybody's really optimistic that we can come back to the fund balance, but while I've been on the board, we've just been spending, so I don't know how realistic that is to think that next year we'll be able to put everything from the operating budget back into the fund balance, and to say that this time next year, we're not gonna vote to do anything. I mean, there's gonna be things that need to be done. I mean, we have that huge, long list of things, so there's always things that need to be done. And I just fear that we're not gonna take, and then next year it's, we're just gonna take another $500,000 from the fund balance. I just see like it's going down. I mean, I don't think we need to have it at like the 60% or the 60, I'm not getting the right number now, but in the 60s, I think, it's just a very slippery slope. And that's where I have a lot of apprehension to say, although this could be a good deal, it's only a good deal if we can afford it and we're comfortable with it, but there's other things that could come up.
Dr. Waterman and I have talked about that, and ultimately, we would not be recommending any more use of fund balance going forward. And so ultimately, in our conversations, what we would be doing is we would be saying, going back to the operating budget that we have, and saying, to your point, Jill, how much money do we have available for these projects? Is it $1 million? Is it $1.5 million in the operating budget? And that's all we would be asking for the board in the future. We would not be going back at this point. Now, look, if we end up with a surplus of $5 million next year, well, then maybe we have another opportunity, right? But if we don't, we're not, in our discussions, we have not had that thought that we're going to continue to go into fund balance beyond this. There would be.
Unless it's needed, right?
Unless it's, of course, 100%. Yeah, unless it's absolutely needed. Let's make it clear, though, we never want to need it to pay for our operating expenses. If we get to that point, we have a problem. We're overspending, right? So we don't want it for that. But for capital projects, if we had an issue of some sort, sure, then we would use it for that. But it is not our intent to come back to the board any longer at this point, until we would potentially build up some additional fund balance. And then, at that time, look, as the financial manager for the district, I want to make sure that we are, around that 50% mark too. So it's not something that I want to say, hey, let's just go, let's just keep going it down, taking it down. I don't want to do that either.
But there's no way to foresee what an emergency issue, because we had that electrical box, was it?
Right, the
I
vault.
mean, they're never
The vault,
I was
yeah.
like,
A way to foresee that.
Yeah, so
I mean, there's things that
essentially,
have come up.
2 years
over the-
and
we would have to
Touch the
use our
fund
annual
balance.
operating
Right,
capital
I was just saying,
expenditures, which we
they've been
have
planned
available
for
now,
that
or
state.
use fund balance. If we
That's
had
right.
some roof, like to Brian's
Yeah.
point, $1 million roof repair, or we would first utilize the annual 1 to 2 million that we have in capital projects, or if we had already expended that, then we would have to go into fund balance. But
Yeah, I mean, that is my concern with an older building, that emergencies do come up, and that's where I think it becomes a slippery slope when we're already like dipping below more than we're all comfortable.
Yeah.
And
Sounds
then-
like bathrooms are already somewhat of an emergency, though, given what's going on with the
How much are we
leaking and
spending
the
to
flooring.
repair on
Yeah.
the,
We're chipping away at that, too.
And don't forget, too, the district does have property casualty insurance, and so if there was some sort of catastrophic issue that occurred that, wasn't just for lack of maintenance, of course, that would be covered by insurance as well. So it isn't as though if we had some sort of disaster that we'd be on the hook for that as well. So,
But we can also put this forward for the next, when we have our things. So it's not like it precludes us if we don't do it this year, we could do it in another year.
100%. You can do it at any time in the future. And again, DLA has the specs. You can resurrect those at any time in the future and utilize them again. Perhaps there would be some minor changes to it at that point, but the specifications could be resurrected at any point and used again and go out to bid with those again. That's true.
Construction costs, though, would increase.
yes,
Presumably,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
right. But I mean, I think like what Tim's saying, it's like gonna be a 25% increase, but we don't know that. You know what I mean? Because during COVID, like, construction costs went way up, and you look at the price of lumber, I mean, that would be, and then it leveled off and things like that, so. I mean, I still am not comfortable with it, so. Because it's the 50% threshold. For me, I feel like we need to take a hard line.
Anything else anybody wants to throw out? Because we do have a vote tonight on all these. And Brian, am I reading this right? We're going to vote on each one of these separately?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, really, we put the agenda together to give the board maximum flexibility.
Yep. No, I appreciate it.
The only other point I wanted to mention is that in the asbestos removal contract, there are really two parts to that. There are the asbestos removal that needs to happen for the HVAC mechanical, and there is the asbestos removal that has to happen for the washrooms. And so That will change that contract, and I'm not sure exactly how that looks if the board decided, look, we're not going to go forward with the washrooms at this time. Not that that's a deciding factor, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that I'd have to go back and, we'd have to go back and talk to the contractor because these were bids, and we'd have to take a look at how that might change that, that look, if in fact, the board had decided not to, do the washroom work this year.
That's good to know, thank you. Anybody else? Throw anything else out there? All right, well, we'll go down the list and see where we land. Thank you. Thank you for all the work that went into this and for all the thoughtful conversation, because I think it's really important. So with that, can we have a motion to approve the contract with Voris Mechanical for the North Campus Mechanical Replacement Project as presented in the amount of $10,438,000?
So moved.
Second.
Marilyn, would you please call the roll?
Member Alvarez?
Yes.
Member Vita Daniels?
Yes.
Member Dillon?
Yes.
Member Giannotti Fry?
Yes.
Member Struing?
Yes.
Member Thomas?
No.
Member Gretsch?
Yes. Okay, can we have a motion to approve the contract with HAP Builders for the North Campus Toilet Room Remodeling Project as presented in the amount of $1,569,000?
So moved.
Second?
Could we please call the roll?
Member Vita Daniels?
No.
Member Dillon?
Yes.
Member Giannotti Fry?
Yes.
Member Struing?
Yes.
Member Thomas?
No.
Member Alvarez?
Yes.
Member Gretsch?
Yes. Can we have a motion to approve the contract with All Types Elevator for the North Campus Elevator Modernization Project as presented in the amount of $337,490?
So moved.
Second?
Will you please call the roll?
Member Dillon?
Yes.
Member Giannotti Fry?
Yes.
Member Struing?
Yes.
Member Thomas?
Yes.
Member Alvarez?
Yes.
Member Vita Daniels?
Yes.
Member Gretsch?
Yes. And can we have a motion to approve the contract with DEM Services for the 2025 abatement project as presented in the amount of $193,000?
So moved.
Second?
Can we call the roll, please?
Member Giannotti Fry?
Yes.
Member Struing?
Yes.
Member Thomas?
No.
Member Alvarez?
Yes.
Member Vita Daniels?
Yes.
Member Dillon?
Yes.
Member Gretsch?
Yes. All right. I know that wasn't easy, but thank you.
And we'll get the
We're gonna
information,
keep
the
talk-
fund balance history, the questions that came up tonight. I can share that with the board this week too.
Yeah. We'll keep this conversation going, obviously, because there's a lot more to discuss around the needs
Tonight.
that the school has. Yes, and yeah, next, right?
Yes, yep.
All right, thank you. All right, our next agenda item is a strategic plan Goal 5 update. So, Dr. Waterman, are you kicking it off? Or,
This is
Right.
our fifth, just real quickly, this is our fifth strategic plan goal update. And last one that we take a deep dive into, if we remember October, we did HR, goal 3, November, goal 1, student academic performance. December was goal 4, family community relationships, and then January was goal 2, which is our learning environment and support. So tonight is goal 5, which is our resource efficiency and effectiveness. As a reminder, shared this with the board last month, but the items that Brian's going to talk about really were developed a year ago in spring in terms of the priority list. That process starts in March of each year and ends all the way in June with board discussion on what our priorities are related to the goal. So he's going to give an overview of the goal and the aligned strategies, also talk about the priority list, but then tonight take a little bit deeper dive on facilities, groundwork for a brighter future, and kind of where we've been, where we're at, and where we need to go. So with that, I'll kick over to Brian.
Thank you, Dr. Waterman. So the goal 5, just as a refresher for everybody, is really what we're looking at is the resource effective and efficient use of resources, our financial resources. Okay, and so really, this goal has kind of 3 parts to it in my mind. It has the financial component to it, and then it has the facilities component to it, and the technology component to it. So strategy 12 is we have 2 strategies under goal 5. and that is to improve technology infrastructure and access for students, staff, and families, which, by the way, we are not going to focus on tonight. We're going to bring back more information on Strategy 12 because we are in the process of updating Ed Tennant is in the process of updating the 5-year technology plan. So when we have that a little more buttoned up, we'll bring that back and have an update for the board on Strategy 12. So really what we're going to focus on tonight is more the Strategy 13, and that is upgrading the facilities to better meet 21st century interests and need of students and staff. And so, again, why are these three related? Well, first of all, when we go back to Goal 5, we know that our facilities are in need of some care, that we know. And so that was one of the pieces that came out when we talked to the community members, we talked to staff members, students especially. They had said, look, these are some of the things that are at the top of the list for us. And so that's really how we generated a lot of these projects that we talk about here. In addition to that, the financial piece ties in because we have essentially what we look at is kind of what I mentioned earlier, and that is we go through our operating budget and we say, okay, how much money do we have that we have to put toward salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, capital equipment for the district, not capital projects, capital equipment for the district, all of those types of things. And so we look at all that, we fund all that first. And then we say, okay, what's left? How much money do we have left annually to make sure that we're getting our projects, we're still doing projects, and we're putting them in on the operating budget. The goal of the district has always been to run a balanced budget, and we've been doing that, and actually been doing better than that, because sure, the budgets are balanced, but we've been putting away some fund balance reserves as well over the last few years, which is good. And so the reason, like I said, that we want to tie all those together is because we want to make sure that we're making those choices in the right manner based on the financial condition of the district and how much money we have to spend on an annual basis. Because if we don't do that, then we're back to, the deficit spending piece for capital projects, and we don't want to do that every year as we talked about, right? So it's a matter of managing all of those items and making sure that we're working within our operating budget. With the history of the district has been such that happens, and that's a good thing for sure. So that being said, what I also wanted to point out is that on our I'm going to jump down to let me see here. So our goal 5, I'm going to touch just here on page. What page is that?
20.
The goal
Slide 20.
metrics.
21?
Yeah.
Right here.
There we go. So I'm going to touch just on our goal metrics here. And so there's a history here of the goal metrics, as well as on the right-hand side, you'll see the current year's numbers in bold, right? And so what are we looking at here? How are we measuring these goals? Well, the first three metrics are related to the state financial profile score in our annual financial report, okay? And so here's where we look at our this is where we get this information from, right? So our fund balance to revenue ratio. Actually, here's a good, forgot that this is in here. Here's a good history of where we have been. Yeah.
You really did a great job pulling that up so promptly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I actually should have.
You heard me, and it happened.
Yes, I should have remembered. So this is where we have been the last 4 years there on the left-hand side. Plus then you have the 23-24 number, and you see that jumped up quite a bit that year. Almost to 67, almost to 68%. And so again, our target has been to stay right around that 50% mark, and we still think that's a relative target. Want to keep it there, even though we know that we might be spending a little bit more in this case, we're still going to be, in that ballpark. So our expenditure to revenue ratio, what does that mean? Well, are we running a deficit, right? And so what that means is when you look at the number for 23-24, we spent 89.3% of our revenue in the 23-24 year, which is the reason we had a bit of a higher surplus in this current year. Now, there's reasons for that. We talked about at the time of the audit. We had less property tax appeals that were paid out. That doesn't mean they weren't filed, but they were paid out that year. We had a really good year in medical insurance last year in terms of that. A couple of those things have turned around a little on us this year as I'm following through the year, but we'll talk about that shortly. But so what's our goal? Our goal is to really be around 98%, right? So what does that mean? Well, if you had $100 million in revenue and you spent $98 million, well, then you had about a $2 million surplus. That's a good spot to be in. We're still putting some money away for those future projects, for anything that we might need. And we're staying under, you never want to go over 100%, because if you go over 100%, and again, there might be the intention to do that, but that's on the capital project side, not on the operating budget side. If you're over 100% on the operating budget side, that means you're overspending your daily expenses with your revenue, and that's problematic. The district has not done that, does not have a history of doing that. And on my watch, I won't let that happen. I certainly hope. So anyway, so that's why that number, that 98% number, we think is a really good metric to use and stay around there. The operating capacity. So this essentially is the third of those three that the AFR looks at, and it says, how many days of cash on hand do you have for operating expenditures? So if the state and really most of our revenues come from the local sources, our property taxes, all that, and the CPPRT, the state and the state of Illinois. So if we didn't receive any money for some extended period of time, how long could we operate without any additional revenue? And so really what this says is here is that for 23-24, we could operate for 273 days without any additional revenue. And so that's a much higher number. We noticed that as these numbers crept up here for 24-25, you see also our operating capacity goes up. Really, our goal is to be around 210. So we'd be in that ballpark. Obviously, it's a little bit higher than where we've been in the past, but we also think that's a good number, and that keeps us with the financial rating, the state, the top financial rating that we would have.
There's no difference on school days, summer days, doesn't matter.
No, it just essentially says it just says operating
because you're
days.
paying
Correct.
costs all year long, even in
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions on any of those three? So those three, the reason I use those is because those three are the most heavily weighted in the score for the financial profile score. There are a couple of other metrics that they use for long-term borrowing and short-term borrowing. I don't really use those for this because it's really not information that makes a whole lot of sense here in terms of where we are in our operating capacity and our operating budget. If you were to look at our long-term borrowing, well, we're kind of maxed out. We know that. And our short-term borrowing is there's a maximum amount still available for short-term borrowing, but we don't want to do that. That's not really where we want to go. So the next two are two others that we would talk about, and that is our long-range facility plan on track. And so we have that facility plan that we have, we put together, what was that, 21, was it?
Fall of 22 was the data collection, and then we presented to the board in 23, February 23.
And then we had the long-range facilities plan, and we've updated that as well. And so really ideal, the life of the plan target would be to have about 25% of that done. I don't know that we're going to make that goal, but we had it sort of as a stretch goal, stretch target at that point. We think for 23-24, we're about 12% done with that, based on the fact that we have the projects that we have done this year, and also it's really based on how much money we anticipate those costing and how much we've spent on those projects. It's really about the only way to kind of measure that at this point. So we think that, we'll be probably around 15% with the additional projects that were approved here tonight. But with the plan ending in a year and a half, right? A year and a half will be in the plan, essentially. So I don't know that we'll get to that 25% number. That would be ideal. Two more years, sorry, thank you. So it would be a bit of a challenge, but we'll see. Maybe we will get there, who knows? And then finally, the building expenditure percentage to the operating funds. And so what we're looking at here is, are we actually doing what we said we were going to do? And are we actually taking some dollar amount, $1, $2 million, $3 million annually, and putting that toward capital projects, excluding any fund balance use, right? That's what this is. And so we essentially want to be somewhere in the ballpark of about 2 to 3.5% of our dollars going toward those building projects. And again, $100 million, we're talking about $2 to $3.5 million worth of money. Now, that actual dollar amount's going to change as we go through time, and that those numbers grow. But really, ideally, that's about where we want to be when we do that. Now, the numbers for the last couple of years are quite skewed, and the reason they are is because I'm including what we are doing for the capital projects that are going on right now, and I'm including I'm including the capital projects fund as well, because we're including those in the numbers up above as well. So I want to kind of be consistent with that, so we see that. So that's why, when we look back to 1920, we're at 3.23%. 2021, which by the way was sort of the COVID year, so we were kind of down there. But then we went up. We did, and we had, I forget what project we had 2021. But again, we did do some fund balance spending then, and so we were at 6.78. Now we get into 2023 and 2024, and we start looking at the bond sale projects. So we're up, about 6.5, almost 7% in those cases. That number will remain elevated as we go through the next 2 years, and then it will drop down again because of the capital projects, the dollar amount dropping down. So those are where we were for 24, 25. You can see the history there as well. And then we'll talk about the expenditures for technology and the long-range the long-range technology plan on track. We'll bring that back when we talk about the technology side of it. Any questions on any of this at all? Okay, let's talk about just quickly the financial highlights, right? So honestly, the rest of this is very similar to what we saw last year in terms of the update. Thankfully, on the financial side, for sure. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the facilities. So, as you heard a couple of meetings ago, independent auditors they provide a clean opinion, no major issues. That's great. District earns financial recognition designation from the state of Illinois for finances, and that is the highest category you can achieve. And so we are there. Obviously, as we know, last year we earned that AAA stable credit rating from S&P for both of our bond sales. So that is great as well. And as I pointed out earlier, district budgets, actual financial operations continue to reflect responsible financial management here in the district. And so those are all good things. So we know, based on what we see with those goal metrics and what we're seeing here from outside, auditors, entities, we're doing all the right things. So that's an important note and something that we want to obviously celebrate and maintain in this goal. So let's go on to any questions on any of those? Sorry. Okay. So let's go on to the highlights for Goal 5 for Strategy 13. We've really been through this. This is the Phase 1, Part 1 projects, I guess, if you will, that we have going on, and they're in place right now. And so we talked about, our funding sources for these projects. We had the bond sale, and so this is a total look at both of them, right? So if we said we expected the cost to be about $46.6 million, and that's the all in on these projects. So we had the 23-24 bond sale. We're at $28 million right now. Our interest earnings are still really pretty good. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to offset even some of that $1.5 million with some of these interest earnings, which would be great, because we aren't spending all that money at this time. It's just difficult for me to make a projection on what that's going to look like until all of those dollars are gone. I can reconcile all that for the board at that point and say, we sold $27 million, we ended up with 28.6 because we had interest earnings on those dollars, and so we can bring that back. And then, of course, as we talked about, the remainder, we would be looking at about $18.6 million in fund balance reserves, or some of the operating budget, as we talked about earlier. So that amount includes, that 18.6 includes the $5 million that we talked about that we still need for the ongoing projects, and then about the $13.6 million for what we need for the projects that we talked about tonight. Again, when we initially talked about this last year, I say last year meaning school year, but it is last calendar year now too, we thought that we would probably have to use a couple of years' worth of operating expenses for these projects, but right now, we believe we're in the position that we don't need to do that, but we can if we want to. And again, talking about the fund balance. This is the important note here that, as we've talked about as well, there are no funding sources identified for any projects beyond the projects in Phase 1, other than the operating budget. and that's it. And, you know, again, when we get back to that operating expenditure, capital projects, now we're talking about replacing roofs, where we're talking about replacing parking lots, more maintenance types of projects than not. Any questions on any of that?
I think probably this is probably a really good time to just note that, you know, 2 to 2.5 years ago when we set out on phase one, and a couple slides down, we talk about the objectives that were outlined by our community in the fall of 2022 and sort of what percentage of that 46 million has been allocated to each of those 5 objectives. But there are really three primary projects that we originally set out to accomplish in phase one that we have now deferred. The first one is, in addition to adding air conditioning in those 60 to 65 classrooms on the west side, there was also a part of that project that would have included modernizing those classrooms. As it stands now, you know, based on what happened a little while ago, those rooms will include new air conditioning, new ceiling and lighting, but they won't include the flooring, the furniture, technology, like truly modernizing the classroom. So that's one project that was deferred out of the original phase one. The second project, we had included an additional turf field at South Campus, which has been deferred, and then also the renovation of the Westfield complex, which is our varsity soccer field. So those are the three. Am I missing anything, Brian?
No, that's
in
it.
Phase one. Those are the three primary projects that were originally included in phase one that now have been deferred. And so to that point, we've kind of reached the end of phase one, and moving on to phase two, we'll have to identify some new funding sources. So I think that was a good time to point that out.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Was there, at that point in time, was there an estimate for each of those different deferred
Yeah, there
projects?
was. Do you have those numbers handy?
And we can-
The turf fields were about $3 to $3.5 million apiece. And then the remaining work on the classrooms, I think was, about another, was it 10 to 11 million, somewhere in that area?
Something like that.
I think that was right.
I can look it up, though.
Thank you.
Let me keep
We'll keep
going.
going.
Yeah, keep going. Thanks. So again, we can kind of just revisit, you know, what our projects are, the ongoing projects right now. Of course, the addition of the new cafeteria at South Campus, renovation of the existing cafeteria to the new music wing, the washroom facilities there. We have about half of those renovated for this year, and then we'll have about the other half renovated for next year. That'll be this coming summer. Improvement of accessibility for the South Campus facilities. So again, that includes the washroom facilities, that includes the new elevator in the cafeteria. The pool and field house light replacement, so that is done, and we were just actually at a meeting last week, and we were talking about it, and we've had some tremendous compliments on the lighting in there now, which is great, because it really was not good prior to that, so we've had some great
Real
compliments.
quickly to answer that question, Joy, your question, in the original plan, the projected cost of the Westfield complex was $3 to $3.5 million.
Yeah.
The projected cost of the turf field at South Campus was $2.5 to $3 million. And then the projected cost of modernizing classroom spaces at North Campus, southwest corner of the building, all floors, was $3 to $3.5 million.
But can I ask you a question about the Westfield? Because that also, we were gonna have to work with the village on that. Does that include, is that like all up, all in, or like pending, like a negotiated
So that was
shared cost, or that's
no,
our
that was
part?
our
That's our
part
cost.
there, and they are currently actively working to secure funding for their part of it, which was the stormwater
Yeah.
detention part. I think that cost was projected at $9 million. And, you know, we maintain regular communication with the village because they're also in the middle of like a multi-year effort to get the funding for that through grants. And so we stay in contact with them, and
Yeah.
they know that, you know, we don't have imminent plans right now to do that project, but also that it's sort of on our list.
Do you get the sense, sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but since it came up, do you get the sense that they will, wait for us to be ready to do it, or will they get to a point where they can't hold on what their needs are?
Yeah, my understanding is that they're still
That they have a
years
ways to
away.
go?
Yeah, that they have a
Okay.
ways to go before they're gonna
Okay.
be at a position where they have all of the funds
All right.
secured.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah.
Thanks, sorry.
Sure. No worries. And so, just kind of going on again, we talked about the lighting replacement, the G-wing, their partial G-wing and D-wing roof replacements as part of the ongoing project. The addition of air conditioning in the E-wing, which occurred last summer, so that was up and running for this year. And then finally, we had interior and exterior door replacement at both campuses as part of the ongoing projects. And so that particular project is scheduled to wrap up in August of this year, in August of 2025. So with any luck, Ed, we'll be close to that, I think, right? Yep. So we still have a ways to go, of course, and there are certainly things that can get in the way, but so far, I think we've been really moving really well. And I think that the contractor's been doing a great job. I know Ed and his team have been doing a great job, so there's been a lot of progress there. We see it weekly, and so obviously pretty happy with the way that's moving on. Any questions on that?
I mean, we've seen updates with the cafeteria, so wait, where are we with the music wing? How's that progressing? Like, where are we?
I think the music wing, the new music wing renovated cafeteria is probably actually ahead of the cafeteria. Would you say that, Ed?
It's significantly further along.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
cafeteria. They are currently they're gonna be painting soon in there.
Oh, wow.
And then we'll see lighting and the kind of finished work starting within the next month or so. So I'm hoping by the beginning of summer that's done.
Okay.
I think it's been a few weeks since I sent you guys pictures, but tomorrow, or Wednesday, I'll be over there again, so.
Okay.
I'll send you guys some pictures.
Yeah.
And obviously, I kind of periodically share this with you guys, but if anyone wants a tour, let me know.
And then the cafeteria we're planning, goal is for fall, correct?
Correct.
Okay, great,
Yes.
good.
We just installed the glass a couple weeks ago, so they're airtight and temperature controlled in there now. so-
Great.
Yep. Okay, and so that really, those are the projects that are ongoing right now. In addition to that, essentially the second part of phase one were the projects that we talked about tonight. And so, again, that's the North Campus classroom modernization, ceiling and lighting piece, the air handler replacement and addition of air conditioning, renovation of some of the North Campus washroom facilities, and renovation of the North Campus main building elevator. So that's really what we have laid out here for us for the next 2 summers at this point, because remember, the HVAC mechanical is going to start in the summer of '25, and then will be completed. And we will not have work going through the school year, but the contract will be that they will work in the summer of '25 and in the summer of '26, and will all be part of this contract now. Okay? Okay. What we wanted to do with this next slide is, I know it's a little wordy and it's a little numbery and a little small. But that being said, what we wanted to do is we wanted to kind of wanted to get this on one document for everybody, so you can kind of see. There's been questions about, well, where are we spending our into sort of buckets, right? Where are we spending our dollars, and what percentage of it is going to those particular buckets? And so we've categorized these, and again, I'm doing this based on dollar amounts, based on, when you look at, so take number one, modernization of existing classrooms, right? We've put in that category the South Campus Music Wing renovation, and now we put in the North Campus classroom ceiling and lighting. So essentially, we've broken, that dollar amount out. It's about $8 million is what we anticipate those 2 projects to total. And of the $42.9 million that we have there, and again, the difference between the 42.9 and what we saw earlier, the 46, there's architect fees, asbestos consulting fees, all those other fees that we talked about that the board wanted to see in total. So that's why you see a little different number here than what you saw earlier. So that's about 18.65% of our total spend. Additional collaborative spaces for students and staff. So this is, we really pretty much put the cafeteria and the common spaces in there, about $15 million total, so about 35% of our total spend there. Accessibility and life safety, the new elevator at South Campus, courtyard renovations, toilet room renovations, and we saw these last year as well, but just updating them for the additional projects. Door replacements at both campuses, toilet room renovations at North Campus elevator renovation, $5.8 million, or about 13.5% of the total spend there. And then improvements to athletic and wellness facilities, the two that we have there were the lighting replacements that we talked about, $257,000, or about 0.6%, so less than 1% of our money has gone there. And then also the replacement of the HVAC mechanicals, and the additional AC that we have added, so South Campus mechanical renovations and AC, and then, of course, now the North Campus, adding that back in, we're at a total of $13.8 million, or about 32.3% of that total spend. And that gets you that total of the $42.9 million. So this really kind of lays out, again, the total dollars, what buckets they're going to, and then what percentage of these sort of two phases we have allocated money for. Are there any
Really
questions?
appreciate this breakdown.
Yeah.
This is great.
Well,
Thank you.
just to clarify, those categories are those are the
Right.
5 objectives that the community outlined as objectives when we did the
Correct, sorry, I
feedback
should have mentioned
process.
earlier, right.
So that was back
Yeah.
in fall of 2022 through surveys and focus groups. At the end of that, it was, basically our community told us, these are the 5 areas that are most important to prioritize. And so I always feel like this is a good illustration of how the funds have been allocated to each of those 5 objectives.
Any other questions on that at all?
Just a quick follow-up. From that feedback or input, are we missing anything that they may have really raised concern about? Or was it just these 5? I just wanted to make
Well, I
sure
mean, these were the
understood.
5 broad themes.
Yeah.
I think something we've talked about throughout this year is, I think it's time to go back to the community. Like, and we kind of talked about this in August as a board. But now that we've kind of completed the funding for phase 1, before we move into the next, and more projects, I think it'd be good to go back and revisit that with our community and say, are these still our priorities? Is there anything new that's come up in the last couple of years that may rise to the top? And probably spend some more time on the specificity of that phase 2, because it's just broad topics now. So we need to drill down on that. I don't have to my computer.
So speaking of phase 2, that's our next slide here. And really, when you look at the additional projects from phase 2 from the facility study, this is just sort of an outline of many different projects that are there, but we've tried to capture most of them with these bullet points, right? So remaining air handler, replacement air conditioning, in district facilities. We still have air handlers in the facilities, in particular across the street at the Vaughan. The field house is done, but in the Vaughan we have in the gymnasiums over there we have air handlers that have to be replaced still. Many accessibility improvements that we still could make throughout the district. One of those that comes up to the top is potentially the addition of another elevator in the North Campus main facility. We only have the one elevator here, and while we're going to have it renovated and we anticipate that it working all the time, unfortunately, there have been times recently when we haven't had an elevator at all, and it makes it very difficult, which is why, of course, that project rose to the top for this coming summer, but it also certainly helps to have 2 elevators in the building. We still have roofing replacement projects. We have remaining life safety projects. We have an updated life safety list that we'll be bringing back to the board here in the next couple of months. And we have, the original one appears in the facility study that we have. We've knocked off many of those items. We still have some more to go, and so we'll be bringing that back to the board to talk about those additional items. Again, renovation of remaining classroom spaces at all district facilities, and improvement of those collaborative spaces. What does that look like? Well, some of that was outlined in the facilities plan, the facility study that we have, but we have not, like I said, we've deferred those to the phase 2 piece. I'm sorry, there's the additional elevator again. I just thought it was a good time to talk about it before. We talk about bleacher replacements in our gymnasiums, in our facilities. Potentially the bleacher replacement at Bennett Field. So those are all things that really should be on the radar at some point here coming up. They don't have to be done tomorrow, but it certainly is something that we need to keep on the radar. Washrooms, remaining washrooms across the street, locker rooms across the street in the Vaughan building, the field house. We've had a conversation about those recently, and those washrooms across the street are very similar to the ones that you see right here in the cross hall. very similar in terms of their age and their look and their styling and that sort of thing. And so again, we have those on there. And then additional athletic, physical welfare, and athletic facility improvements too. So those really are just really some broad categories of items that appear in that facility study that we have. And we know that, when we updated that study, we believe those would cost probably somewhere between $85 and $100 million if we did all of those. Now, I'm sure that number's gone up since then. This is just the old estimate from last year that we had in there. We're not, at this point, because we don't have a plan to kind of look forward and say, where are we at with these and what's going on, we didn't update that estimate yet. If we were to start to find funding sources and then look at some more projects, then of course we would update that and bring that back to the board and talk through what we think reasonable costs for those would be, just like we do with all of our projects. Again, as we know, as we talked about today, there are no additional funding sources really at this particular point, other than our operating budget moving forward. And so we would obviously have to find some additional funding sources to continue moving through our Phase 2 projects. That being said, again, I like these pictures because it's really starting to take shape like this right now. If you get a chance to look at the additions here, they're really starting to, especially the exterior there, the cafeteria. That's a shot of what it will look like from the outside. As Dr. Waterman pointed out earlier, all of that glass is now in, and you can really, like I said, start to see it take shape. The next picture is what sort of the interior of the cafeteria is going to look like. Again, those stairs are they're in, not 100% yet, but you can actually start to see it coming together pretty well in there. And then I have two pictures just of the music spaces in there as well, just to refresh everybody's memory. I'm sure there's an exterior picture of the music wing, and then we have an interior picture of that as well. So just something to refresh everybody's memory of what's going on with those projects and what we anticipate them looking like here in the next 8 to 9 months or so. So that is the Goal 5 update.
One thing that is very close, but we didn't mention it tonight, but a year ago, the board approved a donation, Stacy M. Baker Charitable Fund for $2 million renovation to the softball complex. We're still working through the village process at Western Springs. We're hoping to have a date for a public hearing coming up very quickly.
Okay.
And then right after that, the bid specs would be distributed. So that's a project that we're probably looking late spring, summer of this year
right.
to complete. So
Yeah.
That's awesome.
we're excited about that.
We'll have multiple meetings with the Village of Western Springs first, and then we'll proceed from there.
Great.
Be happy to answer any questions. And again, as I said, we'll bring back the technology part of this goal at a future meeting when we really button down that 5-year technology plan. And again, the 5-year technology plan really outlines what we want to do, what we want to accomplish every year as a roadmap with new technology items, new technology infrastructure, all of that sort of thing. So we'll have that part of it coming back here fairly shortly, because we're starting to wrap that up as well.
Awesome. Look forward
But
to
yeah,
it.
and that will include infrastructure with Ed, facilities with Brian, instruction with Scott. So that'll be all of the above.
Yeah.
Discussion.
Good.
Any other questions?
No, looks fantastic.
Thank you so much.
This is really helpful because it's such a big plan and we talk about it in pieces all the time. So to have this all together and updated is really helpful because obviously we've been talking about future funding. We're going to continue talking about future funding. So this is going to be a great reference. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. And we'll continue to update the facility study. So what we'll do is, once we finish these projects, we'll, I'm talking about the current projects, we'll update the facility study because we'll take those off, and then we'll update with anything else that would jump on, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. It feels like it's sort of a never-ending endeavor, and it probably is to that point, but we need to kind of keep that as a living document, not something that we put together a facility study, put it on the shelf, and then let's not touch it again.
Yeah.
That really doesn't do us any good. So we want to continue to update that as we go and have it available and accessible so that we have on our radar, in addition to the things that are maintenance issues, all that sort of thing, what else do we have out there that we want? or need to accomplish.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
welcome.
Nope, nope, it's good. All right, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. That was it, right? That's our agenda. Do we have anybody for public participation? Okay. Well then, thank you, everybody, really appreciate it. At this time, the board will move into closed session for the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, specific individuals who serve as independent contractors in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or specific volunteers of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee, a specific individual who serves as an independent contractor in a park, recreational, or educational setting, or a volunteer of the public body, or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. 5 ILCS 120/2C1. The board will not be taking any action after closed session. Can we please have a motion to move into closed session?
Second.
Thank you. Could we please call the roll?
Member Sterling?
Yes.
Member Thomas?
Yes.
Member Alvarez?
Yes.
Member Gina Daniels? Yes. Member Dillon?
Yes.
Member Giannotti Frye? Yes. Member Gretsch?
Yes. Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Oh, it would be fun. It's always a good one. Thank you.